All right, welcome everyone to the Historically Present podcast. Today we are joined by Ryan McBeth. Just a little bio about Ryan. He's a software architect, he's a novelist, and a triathlete, and a YouTuber. He makes videos on YouTube about programming, cybersecurity, OSINT, and military topics. Ryan's also spent 20 years as an anti-armor and heavy weapons infantryman with 3 overseas deployments. He's an avid runner, triathlete, and Washington, D.C. sports fan, which is kind of rough, but and
that's been tough.
It's been tough, hasn't it?
It's been tough.
I was going to say.
He lives in Silver Springs, Maryland. So welcome, Ryan. We're so happy to have you on the podcast. How's it going today?
Yeah, it's all right. I mean, I just got home from work. I shoved some food in my mouth and changed clothes, and I'm here with you guys.
Good deal.
I appreciate you inviting me on.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we wanted to kick it off, and just I think, and I said this, in our introduction clip that we've sort of been thrust upon this war in many different from many different perspectives. So we've heard from the military side, we've heard from the diplomatic side, and kind of everyone has sort of their messaging, and the messaging that I think a lot of people don't really understand or haven't dug into deeply is kind of the messaging from the military side. Like, what is it, learning about these artillery pieces and what they actually do and how do these formations happen. So that's why we kind of reached out and wanted to have you on the podcast. I probably binge watched like 50 of your videos one night. So you had a lot of great info and you kind of answered a lot of my questions. And I thought, we should probably get you on the podcast to talk more.
One of my favorite ones was just, even one of your more recent ones, the training video of the Russians with no magazines in their weapons. So,
that wasn't really wrong.
Right.
If you're in the military, we have a term we call crawl, walk, run, where you might try something with no ammunition and you do it several times until you get it right. Now, if you're teaching people, hey, this is how you fire from a window, this is how you fire from a doorway. You don't need a magazine. You don't need live rounds. So you would totally do that normally. One of the things that I like to fight is some of the misinformation about how Russians do training. Because someone might look at that and go, oh, look, they gave them rusty weapons. Well, maybe that's one unit.
Right.
Don't underestimate your adversary. Don't look at that one clip and think that, one video clip, I should say, and think that everyone's getting rusty weapons, because you might be very surprised when they show up on the battlefield. Because the ones who survive that initial contact are going to become the non-commissioned officers for the next wave of recruits, and they're going to know a little something.
Right.
But it will be learning by attrition.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I wanted to kick off kind of maybe start at the beginning here. Obviously the whole world was shocked, unprepared, to a certain degree, I guess, when Russia fully invaded Ukraine. And now a lot of Ukrainians will say that this is not the beginning of the war. Actually, the war started 8 years before, in 2014. And so this is just the big escalation of that. And wanted to kind of get your thoughts from your perspective on the Russian invasion, and like what was your reaction initially when they started seeing the tanks rolling in, and kind of what's your assessment of the first couple days, I would say, of this attack?
That's a really good question, because now we have the benefit of hindsight.
Yeah,
right.
So I can really say whatever I want, right, and make myself look correct. The honest answer was that I thought that Russia was going to take a lot of punishment coming in, especially from the north.
Interesting.
Russia, really, no army except for Iraq. The Iraqi army in 2003 has ever had to deal with modern anti-tank weapons. I would say, to an extent, the Iraqi army in 2001 as well, because they had to deal with tow missiles. But I know that Russia knew about the Javelin.
Yeah, right.
I know they knew about it. Like, I know what it's like to get punched in the face. But you don't know what it's like to get punched in the face until someone punches you in the face. And I think Russia slammed right into those Javelin missiles, and they had absolutely no idea what to do.
Yeah.
I think they thought it was going to be a 3-day war, and it was going to be over. And I heard people on the news saying that Ukraine was going to fall within days, and I was going, I don't think that's going to happen, just because nobody's ever fought smart anti-tank weapons before. And Russia has no light infantry. It's actually fascinating. They don't do light infantry. Most of the other armies in the world do light infantry. The British do light infantry. America does light infantry. Australia does light infantry. Colombia is probably some of the best light infantry on the planet.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, they're what does Colombia do? They're constantly fighting FARC, and they're constantly fighting narco terrorists. How do you get good at something? Practice.
Drug cartels, right?
Yeah. Right. Practice.
Right. Yeah.
So when Russia invaded, I knew like these guys are going to have trouble. I thought they would get to Kyiv. They didn't. And that actually didn't really surprise me. I kind of figured that they would run into a meat grinder, and they did. But of course, I can say anything right now, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So was there anything that was kind of maybe out of the ordinary from a tactics perspective of what you started seeing on the news and, displayed? You're like, oh, wow, that's weird that they would do something like this, or that's a interesting way of approaching that. Or
if I may, just also with your background, just noting like, oh, this is what it's like to see the Javelin start hitting.
Yeah.
And I call them like this in some capacity, all this heavy military infantry.
The one thing that I noticed is that Russians were not performing a certain battle drill. I believe it's battle drill. I'm trying to remember what this was. I think it's battle drill 2, react to contact. So in the U.S. Army, there's a battle drill. It's essentially like a battle drill is a tactic that you practice again and again and again until it becomes like a memory, right? Mm-hmm. Until you can do it with your eyes closed. And battle drill 2 is react to contact. That's where you hit contact, and now you essentially have two choices. The choices are retreat, or I should say break contact, which is actually another battle drill 3, or you assault, and that's battle drill 1, or battle drill 1 alpha if you're a squad. So one of the things that you're supposed to do when you hit contact, depending on how far away you are, is if you choose to assault through, you might want to back up, consolidate, reorganize, assault. Or if you're in what's called a near ambush, meaning like the enemy is just fired at you from very, very close by, you literally have to turn and assault directly at the enemy. And you might think that sounds crazy. You're running directly into the enemy's gunfire. Well, if you're in the kill zone, you're going to die anyway.
Right.
So the one thing they're really not expecting you to do is turn directly toward their guns and go directly for them. And one of the things I noticed was that they were not doing this particular battle drill. They were not reacting to contact. You would see a vehicle get hit, and they're still coming down the same road. You've seen this with landmines as well, where a vehicle hits a landmine. Well, let me try something different. They go around it, and they hit another landmine. Like, you would think maybe you need to change up what you're doing here. But they weren't. And I think a lot of that goes back to training. I think if Russia had good training, and we're constantly training their troops and training them to a certain standard, they would have had, I don't think they would have had an easier time. I still think they would have gotten hurt by Ukraine, but it wouldn't have been so, I don't want to use the word laughable, because there's nothing funny about this. There's nothing funny about even Russians dying.
Right.
But the results wouldn't have been so catastrophic if people had known what to do. And I think there was one meme I saw which had a Ukrainian soldier saying, we're lucky that they're so stupid.
Yeah.
And it's not that they're stupid, it's that they weren't properly trained.
Yeah. So that's a great kind of segue to the next question, I think. And we wanted to talk a little bit about Well, maybe follow up before I ask this question. Follow up to what you were just saying. Do you think that was as a result of the sort of the Western weapons that Ukraine was given, or was that a result of kind of the better training maybe that Ukraine had received from NATO, or both?
Probably both. I mean, the weapons certainly helped. There has been nothing like the Javelin on the battlefield ever.
Yeah.
When I first joined the military, I used to carry a special kind of anti-tank missile called Dragon, the M47 Dragon. And the Dragon was wire guided. Think of it like a mini tow missile. And so you'd have to set the thing up and you'd fire it. And then it took like 11 seconds to get out to 1,100 meters, and you're guiding this thing. There's this big plume of smoke, and all the gunners have to do, if the enemy sees that plume of smoke, they can just traverse their turrets and start shooting at you. That's assuming if they see it. So all they have to do is make you blink, make you twitch, make you throw off your aim. So what's unique about the Javelin is that you can fire, and as soon as you fire, the microchip in that missile is going after that target. And you can just unhook the clue, the command launch unit from the tube and run, which is exactly what you should do, because you're going to have a bunch of Soviet steel coming down on you in a couple of seconds if they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So that has really changed the game, because you can have these tiny teams firing from 1,000 meters away, and there's nothing you can do about it. There's literally nothing you can do about it. It must be horrible from the other end. When you watch your friend's vehicle get blown up and you don't know if you're going to be next, and there's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
So I think the Javelin was a game changer. The training was a game changer as well. One of the things that the Ukrainian army did was get rid of Didochina, the rule of the grandfather.
Yeah.
It used to be that Ukraine actually had this system of hazing, and they put a stop to it. And I think that's made their army a more effective force. And also, you're dealing with people who are defending their own country. Of course, they're going to fight like wolves. So that's probably so. It's a combination of training and the weapons. But nobody's ever seen weapons like this. I've said this before. You know why America doesn't have free health insurance? Because we have the Javelin. We have something that can kill you from 1,400 meters away automatically.
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
So along those lines, and I'm curious, because when I saw the Javelin obviously being deployed, I mean, there was, I'm guessing maybe you've seen this video, but this concept of the sword has gotten so strong on the battlefield,
so sharp,
so sharp, it can just destroy quickly. And defense seems to be something that, I mean, is there even a way to defend against it? Not to mention, I'm just curious what you think. You talked about, they're fighting for their homeland. I mean, even the resourcefulness of taking what seems like off-the-shelf DJI drones and strapping
grenades
essentially, right? I mean, or almost like a mini mortar or something like that, and dropping.
I believe 30 millimeter grenades from an automatic grenade launcher.
Okay, I mean, first of all, did that really exist in that type of concept in some other way that was, or is that just ingenuity on the battlefield coming, as we, coming in front of us basically as we watch it? So
some of that was ingenuity.
Okay.
Typically, and I'm not calling Ukraine an insurgent force, but typically insurgent forces have to come up with very unique ways to kill their enemy. That's how IEDs, improvised explosive devices, became so prevalent in Iraq and Afghanistan. So insurgencies have to figure out a way to fight their enemy without advanced technology or without traditional weapons. And there were drones in Iraq. I believe ISIS had drones that they used to use against Iraqis. I don't believe the kind of small drones were used in Iraq and Afghanistan when America was there, mainly because that technology really didn't become that prevalent until fairly recently. Mm-hmm. I think it's a combination of ingenuity and the fact that you have no other choice. You have to make this thing work. And the way they drop these weapons from these drones is that someone figured out, when I turn on the light, on these drones, the light is on a separate circuit. So I can use that light to activate, I guess, a solenoid that will drop a weapon. So really, when they're flying that little hobby drone, they turn on the light, which I guess some of these drones have flashlights on.
Right, yeah.
You hit the light, and instead of going to the light, they just have that, it's probably a 5-volt circuit that just activates a solenoid that says, drop this. And so that they figured that out because they had to. It's either that or die, right?
Yeah.
So, death is a pretty good motivator for innovation.
Is there any guidance to those? Because I've seen like some of these shots have just been right on the target. Is
it's
that just
a standard 30 millimeter grenade from I can't remember the darn name of the weapon system. And it's funny as I actually did a video about it, but it's a 30 millimeter automatic grenade launcher. The I forget the darn name of it, but you guys can look that up. I'm sure someone will remind me.
Gotcha.
It was I get this a lot. Well, actually, it was an XP235 B model. This one was made by Ivan. You can tell because he always leaves tool marks on the top of it. All right, man, I'm not that into weapons.
Oh, man. Okay.
So, all right. So speaking of ingenuity then, and this is where we're going to start getting into some more interesting or bigger stuff, literally. Okay. The question we kind of have is, we look at the engine. I mean, with the Kerch bridge being hit. First of all, I'm curious if you think that it was Ukraine, because I feel like nobody is really stating for sure. Like it was not even Ukraine seems to really take full credit for it. But even besides that, the concept of is that ingenuity once again coming into the play here to say, okay, we're gonna because. It seems, was it fertilizer? It seems like one of the most recent.
Ampho. Yeah.
Ampho. Okay. Yeah.
So I thought about making a video to follow up about the Kerch Bridge and how I think it was destroyed.
Yes.
So let me back up a little bit. I'm probably a little bit older than you guys, but I don't know if you remember the Oklahoma City bombings in 2000.
Yeah, 93.
Okay, 1995. All right.
95.
So
around
that time, we were in I'm going to say a war. We were maintaining a no-fly zone over Serbia, Operation Southern Watch. Now, when that federal building was blown up, did anybody go, oh my God, Serbia just blew up a federal building? No, nobody did, right? So whenever you look at stuff like this, and for your audience who doesn't know, there was an American who had been a soldier who was upset with an ATF raid on a compound in Texas, and he decided to become an anti-government soldier, and he decided to blow up this federal building with ammonium nitrate. It was 4,800 pounds, I believe, of ammonium nitrate, fertilizer, essentially, fertilizer and fuel oil. And when you look at how this operation went down, we can kind of reduce things. And so you go, all right, well, let's start with number one. Who did it? All right, well, let's say Russia did it as a false flag. And I hate false flags because it implies competence, not just in Russia's government, but in any, the moon landing, the moon landing, false flag. So we got 20,000 people at Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman, and they all agreed to stay quiet about what they were developing. Like, come on. So I don't like false flags, but let's just go down this path, all right? Let's go down the winding road of this thing for a second. So with Russia, if Russia wanted to do some kind of false flag, it would have made more sense to load a truck with just enough explosive material, ammonium nitrate, to cause an explosion but not damage the bridge. You would have gotten the full effect of the terrorism. You would have had your public display, but you still wouldn't have lost your infrastructure. So it would have made more sense to go that route. Now, there's always a possibility that, hey, think you use enough dynamite there, Butch? So maybe they got the formula wrong.
That's what I was just going to say. Yeah.
Screwed it up. That's possible too. People make mistakes. I don't think that's the case. Yeah. So option number two, you have Russian soldiers or some cadre of officers who are saying, you know what? This war is horrible. I hate seeing men's lives wasted like this. I lost my good friend in Ukraine. There's no reason we're doing this. Let's try to stop the war by destroying this bridge, or at least shorten the war by destroying the bridge. An Operation Valkyrie type thing, right?
Right.
So if they were going to do that, the rail line is way more important than the road line. The rail line is way more important than the road bridge because Russia moves everything by rail.
By rail.
Everything by rail. So if Russian officers had some kind of secret cabal to try to starve Russian soldiers of supplies in the Kherson region, they probably would have blown up the rail bridge, not the road bridge. The road bridge is bupkis compared to the amount of supplies that they can bring in via rail. The road bridge is hit. All right, so let's go to maybe it was a Russian delivery of ammunition. Okay. Russia delivers all their ammunition by train. They never deliver it by truck. And, they sent out pictures of what they claimed to be the truck. Any kind of truck that was carrying explosives would have explosive placards on it. Just because it's Russia doesn't mean that they don't have a Department of Transportation that has rules about what you put on the road. And if a truck gets into an accident, firefighters need to know, hey, this thing might be carrying explosives. So there's another theory that, hey, they're sending ammunition and it's by truck and the truck hit a bump and it blows up. And anyway, weapons for the most part don't work like that. They need fuses. They don't just randomly blow up. If there's a fire on the bridge and the truck is in the fire, then it can blow up, and the firefighters need to know that, and they know that because of the explosive placards. All right, so I think we've taken Russia off the table here. Let's look at Ukraine.
Right, yeah.
All right, did Ukraine blow up the bridge? So, how? So they put bombs and ammo into a shipping container. Ammo means ammonium nitrate. They put ammo into a shipping container, and they ship that to Romania, and then that goes on a circuitous route all the way through Russia until it ends up on a truck that goes on the bridge and explodes just at the right time. That is some kind of Bugs Bunny, Rube Goldberg contraption, like the boot kicks the ball falls into the bucket. A lot of things have to go right for that plan to work.
Yeah.
Right? Like that plan would be laughed out of any, So, all right. So let's look at another possibility. Could Ukraine have found sympathizers to maybe drive a vehicle of explosives into Russia?
Like a suicide bomber, basically, right?
A suicide bomber. I've actually been reluctant to say that because you say the word suicide on YouTube, they come down on you like Patrick Swayze in Roadhouse. So, I'll let
involuntary.
In my first video, people were going, "So it was a suicide bomber?" I'm like, you said it, not me. I ain't getting demonetized over this. So, either a suicide bomber or a patsy, right? Patsy meaning someone who doesn't know that they're driving a truck full of explosives.
Right. Yeah.
So, in order to do that, you have to have agents operating inside Russia. I have a feeling the FSB maybe knows who all these people are and they're dead by now. And also, who are you going to recruit? Who's going to say, yeah, blow me up? Now, it is possible you could construct a bomb, but what's the one common thing among any kind of bombing that you've seen, whether it be the first time the World Trade Center was bombed or when the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building was bombed? What's the one common thing? It's affinity. Let me explain. So if you look at the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, what do you have? You have people who hated the United States government, right? So that's an affinity group. If you look at the bombers who rented the Ryder truck to blow up the Twin Towers the first time back in, was it 93?
Yeah. 93. Sorry. That's my issue. Yeah.
Back in 93. What was their affinity group? Well, their affinity group came out of one mosque in, I believe it was Brooklyn. So you look at someone like, forget about bombing for a second. Why was Bernie Madoff so successful in his Ponzi scheme? Because Bernie Madoff was Jewish. So who did he sell his Ponzi scheme to? Other wealthy Jews. Oh, this person's like me. I have an affinity. So for a Ukrainian agent to have an affinity group inside Russia, That's a stretch. You're kind of pushing it. But what has Russia done over the past couple of years? They've killed a heck of a lot of Muslims in Syria, in Chechnya.
Oh.
So if you have a Chechen or you have a Tartar, who are both ethnically Muslim, I should say religiously Muslim, not ethnically. So you have an affinity group, a Muslim affinity group. And you could easily have a Muslim Chechen or Tartar terrorist decide to build a bomb, and you get all these components and nobody talks because you're within your affinity group. And they either act as a suicide bomber or they get another part of the affinity group to be a patsy, drive over the bridge, and you have your detonation. So I think once you reduce everything, I think that's what you come up with. So I don't think the Ukrainians did it. I don't think the Russians did it. We might never know who did it.
Interesting.
But I wouldn't be surprised if it was a terrorist group inside Russia, because terrorism happens during wartime too. Look at the Murrah building. That was terrorism. Happened during wartime. The Serbs didn't do it.
Right.
The American did.
Yeah. So I just looked up the name of the alleged driver. His name was Majir Yusubov, which is in like you were saying, and actually a Muslim name. Samir Yusubov is the guy who owned the truck, and his uncle, I believe, is what it says, or the cousin, was Majir Yusubov. Which, yeah, your theory has some credibility there. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Well, once in a while, I'm right. I just wish I could be right about the Wizards winning the playoffs.
Well, I mean, it is one of those things where even I was thinking to myself, first of all, how would the Ukrainians get something like that there?
And keep it under wraps.
And keep it under wraps. And yeah, anyways.
Without an affinity group, I think it would be very difficult.
Be very difficult.
Yeah, and then these groups tend to, I think, like you said, stay under the radar. They tend to, have a level of trust with each other that just doesn't leak out to the public, if you will. So that's interesting. Speaking of other attacks, we saw another attack recently on or leak, if you will, of a pipeline, so-called pipeline under the North Sea. Thoughts on that? That was, I believe, the Nord Stream 1 pipeline that was started leaking, and then we found out that there's probably more to the story than we know, right?
Yeah, people keep trying to get me to talk about that. I tend to only talk about stuff I'm familiar with. I am not a pipeline expert.
Fine,
I can talk about cybersecurity. I can talk
right.
about weapon systems. I know very little Navy.
Yeah.
I can talk a little bit about aircraft carriers, littoral combat ships, and amphibious assault ships, and so on. I know that. So my suspicion. This is a podcast. We're just three guys.
Right.
So there's an excellent book that everybody should read. It's called The Field Guide. The Field Guide to Human Error. It's by a guy named Sidney Decker, or The Field Guide to Understanding Human Error. It's by Sidney Decker. And this book, the guy is mainly like an airline crash investigations guy, but this is applicable to just about any kind of field of human error. I work in software. Nobody comes into work, in the morning going, you know what? I want to drop the production database today. Nobody says that. Nobody says, I want to inject a piece of code that's going to shut everything down. I want to work till 12 at night tonight. Nobody says that. And if they are saying that, they're a psychopath and you should fire them, right?
Right.
So I think that it is certainly possible that you have a pipeline that isn't being maintained correctly because there's a war going on and you have some kind of buildup of a gas. And if this gas isn't filtered out occasionally, and why did they blow up at around the same time? Well, if they shut them down at around the same time and the diameters are the same, you could easily see some kind of gas being, gas turning into a solid. And then when the water leaks into it, I'm not a pipeline expert. Right. But you could easily see how if water is constantly leaking in and then that water contact some kind of item in there that builds up. If it's not flushed out, then you could have an explosion and then another explosion quickly afterwards because, they're both shut down at the same time and gas isn't flowing. So
a reaction caused another reaction type concept.
I mean, I don't think one being blown up caused the other, but I could easily see, look, if you turn both off at the same time and they're both the same diameter, I could see something happening, in a similar way.
Similar way, yeah.
Very, one after the other, because there's only so much debris that can build up of whatever chemical. Again, I'm not a pipeline guy.
No, that's fine.
I'm reluctant to even talk about that. That's one of the reasons I didn't make a video about that. I have enough to do without having to learn how pipelines work.
Yeah.
Understandable.
Armchair pipeline experts, right?
I will say this though, with the Kerch Bridge and now even Russia's kind of retaliation on that, and with once again whatever happened with the pipeline, just kind of where do you think the assessment is right now with Russia, Ukraine, and maybe if you want to lump the West in this a little bit right now? Where are we right now? Because we're now, is it 7 months?
Yeah.
No. 7 months, yeah, almost 8.
Yeah.
Yeah, almost 8 months in. Obviously, the first 2 months was kind of wild, maybe a little bit of leveling. And then in the past 60 days, it just seems like there's been something happening in some capacity at a pretty steady clip. Now, maybe that's just the news. Maybe that's just what we see. I can totally understand that. But anyways, it seems to me that things are moving fast, and there's talks about, is Russia out of missile, running low on missiles. And it seems like we're losing, the reserves that we had in the West to a certain extent. They're getting used up pretty fast here too. I guess where do you think where are we at right now? Maybe
I think there's a stalemate. There's a stalemate, and the temp. So Ukraine had some pretty amazing operational tempo for the past 6 weeks.
Yeah,
like what they did, and they crossed the Oskil River, which I didn't think they'd be able to cross. All right, well, that was a new one. Wasn't expecting that, but they managed to do it. And crossing a river is one of the hardest things for an army to do. Crossing a river and passage of lines, two hardest things for an army to do. So I think that Ukraine has essentially run out of steam because they don't have the reserves of weapons and equipment to keep continuing this push. That's bad, mainly because it gives Russia more time to push their reservists in. I think Russia is running out of missiles, but so is Ukraine.
Right.
Every time, and when you think about it, every time Russia launches a cruise missile and Ukraine responds by shooting that down with an S-300, I could easily see, Russia saying, well, we managed to destroy an S-300 missile.
Yeah.
Right.
That still costs plenty of money, right?
Interesting.
That's kind of an easy one there, right?
Yeah.
And there's only a limited number of those missiles. The West only has a certain amount of ammunition as well.
Yeah.
And I don't believe anyone in the West would manufacture an S-300. Who's manufacturing missiles? You might manufacture components for MiG-29s because there's a market for that. But there's not necessarily a market for new S-300 missiles when the manufacturer was originally Russian.
Right.
So now the West has to push, and he needs to start pushing Western surface-to-air missiles into Russia or into Ukraine. And this may seem like kind of a shock. The West is not good at surface-to-air defense. Yeah, we got the Patriot. We have the Stinger system, I forget the Norwegian missile. I forget what that's called. The
NAXAM. Yep.
Missile. England has missiles that they've donated. But the West usually concentrates on air superiority as their defense.
Right.
Russia always used, not always, they had their own interceptors and fighters, but what's kind of weird is that Russia doesn't like people to think independently, or at least the Soviet Union didn't like people to think independently. So
this is true.
Even their fighters, the fighter jets didn't get autonomy when chasing targets. They got instructions from the ground, vector to heading 208, Angels 40. Go that way. The target should be there. The pilots didn't get a lot of agency. And I also think that Russia was way behind the West when it came to miniaturization of electronics and aircraft. So if you're not good at miniaturization and you're not good at giving people agency to decide when to shoot or what to shoot or how to go after a target, and you like officers to have control over things, surface-to-air missiles are a great way of doing that. Because you don't need miniaturization. Everything's in a huge van. All the computer systems are in a huge van. And you just tell the missile, follow that radar beam. Right? So Russia got pretty darn good at surface-to-air missile technology. Really good at it. So that's kind of one area where I actually think they have initiative. And they built a lot of these systems. I mean, you look at their systems. They have S-400, S-300, Book, Tor, the Panzer.
Yeah.
There's another system whose name I can't remember. The Shika, the anti-aircraft gun. They have like 5 different air defense systems. What does America have? We have 2, 3. We got the Avenger or the Stinger system. We used to have the Bradley linebacker. We got rid of that. And we have the Patriot and the THAAD.
Yeah.
And we don't build a lot of these things. I think we have 6 brigades of air defense. I might be wrong on that, but I believe it's 6 brigades, at least of Patriot air defense. Not a lot.
So we kind of fight a different war, right? Essentially, like you said, we in the U.S. In the West really try to get after air superiority as soon as possible, right?
Oh, well, yeah, because air superiority, Israel does this too. Israel's never been a big artillery country, but they're a big air power country, because what's nice about a jet fighter is that a jet fighter can be shooting down planes one day and can be bombing troops the next. It's multi-role, right? Most fighters are multi-role. So if you invest in pilots and you invest in training and you invest in turnaround time, meaning turning those jets and getting them back in the air, which Israelis are really good at, if you invest in that, then you have a multi-platform capability system.
Right.
For the most part, an air defense missile is just an air defense missile. Now, somehow they figured out how to make these S-300s essentially mini ballistic missiles, which I'm really shocked at. I didn't see that one coming. But you figure, every air defense missile has the option to shoot and go in a straight line, because at least in America, that's how we practice shooting down missiles. We'll actually fire an old Patriot missile that's going to expire, and we'll shoot it down with another Patriot. So they probably have a similar system where they'll fire an S-300 on a certain course, and they'll just let the ballistics, they calculate out the ballistics. They'll just go, all right, well, this S-300, its motor burns out in 4 seconds. So we know it's going to travel this far. So ballistically, it'll land X amount of kilometers away. It's not going to be a precision warhead, but that's probably how they do it.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah. That's, again, stuff we don't really think about.
Ryan. Good damn it. Okay. I feel like there's no good segue here.
Let's talk about a lighter subject.
Well,
right?
no, it's not a lighter subject. It's a subject everybody's rattling. Sorry, I'm not trying to use the jargon across the internet, but nuclear potential, like nuclear war. I have some multitude of thoughts on this, but obviously, there's all the stuff that intricately that we don't. You had some videos about, potentially striking. A good case for striking England, for example, if you're Russia, to tie down NATO. But anyways, without further ado, what are your thoughts as to maybe the likelihood maybe even is it inevitable, or like is there a percentage?
I don't like to get into that. I don't think it's likely. And there's two reasons for that. The first is that I think that Russia knows that once they. So I think there's three reasons. Three.
Yep.
The first is that Russia knows if they use a nuclear weapon, they are going to become the pariah of the world. They're essentially going to become another North Korea. Okay. So that's number one. The second thing is China. Because once you take that in Russia, from what I understand, at least back in the 80s, this was the case. You can't put caps back on vodka. Once you open a bottle of vodka, you can't put it back on again. It's literally a pop top. You can't recork it. And in Russia, I guess the thought was, well, number one, it costs more to manufacture a bottle that you can recork. And number two, once you take the top off, why wouldn't you finish the bottle? Now, as much as I like that theory, I've finished a couple of bottles in my day.
Jeez.
I think that once Russia uncorks that nuclear bottle, that they can't put it back on again.
The top back on.
And I think China is saying to Russia, hey, if you do this, we're not going to be friends no more. I think China's already scared because they already know they backed the wrong horse. And they're looking at all their vehicles going like, ours is based on the T-72.
Yes.
And if Russia uses a nuclear weapon in Ukraine, it opens that bottle that America can use nuclear weapons if China decides to invade Taiwan.
Right.
That's a problem.
Oh, man.
That's a problem. And when you think about it, and I'm going to invoke the very bad things rule, which in that movie, Very Bad Things from 1998, Christian Slater had a great line. All we're trying to do is take a 105-pound problem from point A to point B. So you just take away all your morality for a second, and you look at nuclear weapons just from the tactical capability. A tactical nuclear weapon would be a great choice for destroying an amphibious assault. It's one of the reasons why the Marine Corps decided to put helicopters on ships and launch their helicopters from ships instead of having mass amphibious landings. Because the era of mass amphibious landings ended the day Russia got the bomb. Because you couldn't mass ships. An amphibious landing zone would be a great place for it to drop a nuclear weapon from a tactical perspective. So a bunch of Chinese ships, can't think of a better target than that for a nuclear weapon. Be a great target if you take away all of your morality and just do the very bad things, right? The third thing is that what target? So if you're going to use a nuclear weapon, remember, nuclear weapons have a dollar value associated with them. So if you're gonna risk the politics and spend the money to deliver one of these weapons, you need to have a good target. And I can only think of one good target, and that would have been a bridgehead or a fording site on the Oskill River. You do that, you have a choke point, you make that bomb hit on the ground so it's dirty. So you actually do get fallout and you irradiate that area. Now you've just eliminated a fording or a bridging site. You've destroyed maybe a brigade because the brigade's all bunched up waiting to cross that bridge.
Yeah.
That would be a perfect place for that. But Ukraine it's crazy what they did. They're following this playbook from what's called the Pentomic Army from 1957. So back in 1957, the U.S. Army basically said, we need to figure out how to fight in a nuclear environment. So they decided to take divisions and they plussed up the divisions by an additional brigade, and they gave each brigade, I believe, an additional 2 companies. So now you have these super overstrength divisions and brigades. And the idea was that these 5 brigades would fan out, and they would just be too small to make a nuclear weapon, to be a good target for a nuclear weapon. And then when they had to attack something, they would come together. They would use their own nuclear weapons in the attack. That's where you get the footage from 1957 of guys walking through the mushroom cloud, walking toward the mushroom cloud.
Yeah.
They would attack, breach through that nuclear weapon debris, and then disperse again. And that's exactly what Ukraine is doing. They're remaining dispersed. Then they come together, they perform the attack, and then they disperse again. So they're never a good target for a nuclear weapon. It's amazing. I've never seen anything like it, but we've never had to worry about that before. The U.S. didn't do that during the invasion of Iraq both times, in 91 and 2003, because we didn't need to. We didn't need to disperse. But somehow Ukraine has figured out how to do this, and they're never collected enough in one place to be a worthy target for a nuclear weapon. It's amazing.
So that's interesting. I think Peter and I were talking offline a little bit, and I think for us, it's like just civilians were like, well, of course you'd want to hit Kiev. Of course you'd want to hit downtown London or downtown New York City with a Duke. But what you're saying is you're going to want to hit the troops and some place that essentially civilians wouldn't really think about hitting a collection of troops.
Yeah.
Why is that?
So there's two theories, right? There's counterforce, countervalue. So counterforce is you're hitting the enemy's ability to wage war. Well, that would be airfields. Airfields, great target for a nuclear weapon.
Right.
Make it dirty.
Oh.
You hit that airfield, destroy the airplanes on the airfield. You make it dirty so you can't fly. Airfields are actually surprisingly easy to repair.
Yeah.
Throw some dirt in there, some asphalt, steamroll it out. You're up again in gravel, actually, not dirt. You're up again in a couple of hours. Not a couple of hours, but not very long.
Yeah.
So if you have to do that in a chemical environment or a nuclear environment, now you're wearing protective gear. Now you got to wait for the fallout to decrease, for the radiological activity to decrease. It's easier to shift airfields, right? If you blow up something like a city, well, what have you got? You haven't really attrited the enemy's ability to wage war. That would be a counter-value target, but what value is there in hitting the city? Unless you're just being vengeful, but then you're going to have, Russia won't exist anymore as a country.
Right.
I actually think Russia could probably get away with using a tactical nuclear weapon. I don't think they will, but I think that I don't foresee them being attacked by NATO over using a tactical nuclear weapon because nobody wants to get involved.
Yeah.
If that was something when I did my video on England being attacked.
Yeah.
People said, no, Europe, they wouldn't fall over. They would fight back. Like, really though? Would they? Because they haven't yet. Nobody has. Nobody has said, you know what? I'm going to send troops. Screw it. Nobody has. So why do you think using a nuclear weapon against Ukraine would be any different? If you really want to get right down to it, with a nuclear weapon, all you have is a very large explosive with some unique secondary side effects.
Right.
And if you use a 10 kiloton warhead on a tactical target, it's not going to affect people in Sweden. There's not going to be fallout. There's going to be fallout that goes around the world. And yeah, it'll be strontium-90 in babies' teeth for a little while, but it's not going to kill anybody outside of that one affected area. So would we retaliate? Probably not. When you think about it.
So
it's still localized.
Yeah.
Okay, so that leads me to something I have thought more recently. I was during the start of the war, I took a trip to Chicago, and just being from I've lived in the Twin Cities, things of this nature, but Chicago, there's so many high buildings, there's just so many people crammed into one spot. I didn't think to myself, oh, this would be a good target for like a nuclear bomb, but I thought to myself, the EMP concept, like if you hit a massive populated area like that, there's just no other way to say it, but you are essentially tying down people to have to take care of a humanitarian crisis, potentially, right? And so my question is there a potential for something like that? I think more and more that would just be they're already hitting power plant stuff already, Russia, for example. Is there some reason why, and maybe it's just the logistics of how this works that I just don't know as much about, that this would not be some sort of potential where you could, if you tie down a city, you were tying down forces, and there's a bunch of secondary stuff here that just happens just because of what you did. So
that's true. That it would be a lot harder for the world to swallow that pill of a city being destroyed than a troop concentration. You kind of have to go with that whole. If you're going to use one of these weapons, what's going to get you the most bang for the buck? And that's going to be troop concentration, because I think there is a chance that the West won't get involved. Now you mentioned EMP. I gotta
push back. Educate me, Ryan. Go.
So EMP means electromagnetic pulse.
Yes,
and it does exist. And essentially, when a nuclear weapon goes off above ground, the gamma rays will hit the air. They'll cause ionization, and you'll have essentially a big magnetic pulse that can damage electronics.
Yes.
One of the issues with something like that is that we've seen EMP effects. They do exist, but the higher up you detonate this thing to cover more area, then the less effect it has. So you have to make the bomb bigger, and we don't really know what will happen with electromagnetic pulse because we never really tested it. At least with we stopped above ground testing and sometime in the 60s, I can't remember. And I think the last nuclear test underground was in 93, if I'm not mistaken. That was in the US. That was an underground nuclear test. So we don't really know what an electromagnetic pulse would be like if it was detonated over a modern city. How far up does it have to be? We don't really know that because we've never tested it. So where would you get the maximum effect? And if you're going to do that, you might as well just blow up the city too. Like,
okay.
Because you don't really know what the effect is going to be unless you actually go up there and try it and do the actual testing. Honestly, I think electromagnetic pulse is a very useful tool for lazy writers who have to figure out a way
fantastic
to take people back to medieval times in a novel or a show like Jericho.
Right.
Or,
Ocean's 11. Right?
It's some writer going, what are we going to do? EMP. What's EMP? I don't know, but it's bad.
Make it
Let's
magical.
Just do EMP.
Oh, man.
EMP.
Jericho. I still don't know what happened in the end. But anyways.
2 seasons.
2 seasons, right.
Yeah.
Just quickly on that. So maybe help me understand. So are you saying an EMP almost is required to have like a nuclear weapon with it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all nuclear
so you can't have one
with
without the other, or you can't have an EMP without a nuke.
I am sure there's a way to develop an electromagnetic pulse weapon in a briefcase that causes local damage to a server rack that's right next to you.
Right.
But this requires a lot of energy. And where do you get that energy? You get that from a nuclear explosion. So that whole EMP thing, that's
thank you for
writer's
educating.
Room stuff. I mean, it might certainly be an issue, but we've never really tested it, so it's kind of tough to really get into because we don't know. We know it exists,
right?
Because we've detected it during some tests, but we don't know how far it has to be to have that Jericho effect.
Yep.
So I got a kind of a hypothetical question on a little bit of a different topic, but let's say the U.S. was in Ukraine's shoes right now. How would the U.S. be defending itself if we were in the position of Ukraine, for example?
That is such a tough question to answer because we've never been in a situation like that. I mean, the one thing we're good at is invading people. We don't. We do it all the time. We're great at it. It's literally what we do. We invade people, and we're good at it. We're really good at it. I mean, it has such a tough. I guess the question would be who would invade us, right? Like you kind of have to war game that one out. Even if you said something like China, I mean, you guys are recording from where? Like Minnesota,
South Dakota. Yeah.
South Dakota. All right.
Yeah.
So the Chinese walk into South Dakota. I don't care what you say about gun ownership. You're going to meet some people who don't want you to be there, and that's that's. It's the truth, right? Like let's get real with this one. As horrible as gun violence is in this country, we don't have to worry about China kicking in our door because everybody has a gun. So it is so tough to answer that question. That's a good one.
So maybe here's another way to think, because you talked about we're good at invading. Maybe a spin-off question of this is maybe more so. I mean, we look at Russia, and they've done some things with their in the past, obviously with Georgia and things of this nature. I mean, it's not to say that they don't have any veteran forces or anything of this nature.
Yeah. But
I do look at the U.S. and maybe even some of our allies that have been with us in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, and there is a, for the past 20 years, some sort of level of understanding, given that maybe not in an exact conventional war of Ukraine-Russia scenario, but there's a veterancy there that is really unique and very difficult, if I may, without having a war that you're in. Yeah. Is that another reason why it seems like we're seeing Russia just not, and whatever they did in the past, it doesn't work because
yes,
the enemy can come bad. So yeah.
So one of I don't want to call it an issue with the Russian army, because it's not necessarily an issue. It's just different how they do things.
Okay.
So people like to go around and say Russia doesn't have NCOs. They do. An NCO, or non-commissioned officer, is a sergeant. It is someone who has been promoted to a position where they have power over usually other enlisted soldiers, and they obey the orders of the officers appointed over them. But one of the things that sergeants do is they act as, for lack of a better term, lubricant. They keep the gears lubricated. People like to say NCOs are the backbone of the Army. We're really not. Logistics is the backbone of the Army.
Yeah.
NCOs are like the oil between the gears that kind of keeps everything going behind the scenes. When I was a platoon sergeant, which is the highest ranking sergeant in a platoon, I would, if we had a mission, my lieutenant would go off to receive the mission. What I would be doing would be making sure the vehicles have fuel, making sure that everyone has the right ammunition, making sure we have the right equipment. Is everybody in the right uniform? Does everybody have the right this, that, and the other? Russia has NCOs. But what they don't have is the U.S. Army's equivalent of the drive-through manager at Burger King, which is what I was. I'm serious. Like that's kind of what these mid-level NCOs are, where they let us work the grill station, and they let us close the store, but they don't let us do the ordering.
Assistant to the regional manager sort of thing, right?
That's so. These middle managers, these E6s, E7s, staff sergeant, sergeant first class, or in the Marine Corps, sergeant first class, or staff sergeant, gunnery sergeant. These middle managers are the lubricant that kind of keeps things going behind the scenes. Because there was a lot of stuff that I used to do. My lieutenant, my captain, they didn't even want to know how I got it done. Because a lot of times I was stealing stuff, or I once built a smoking area out of lumber that I acquired. That was a good story. I'll tell that story one day. That was a good one. I had an Army story about that. I actually went and stole some antennas to raise an antenna up off the ground because the S6, the commo guy, didn't want to do that. But what Russia lacks is this core of NCOs. Now, in Russia, in a way, that's okay because they have junior NCOs, so they have leadership down at the squad level. But in the Russian army, what they encourage you to do is, if you want to progress on a technical path, if you want to be a missile maintainer, there are ways for you to do that. There are ways for you to become a warrant officer and you become a technical expert at maintaining missiles. They have that. If you want to get into leadership, they suggest you become an officer. But there's really none of that Burger King drive-through manager.
Got you. Okay.
Middle management in their army. And one of the nice things about that middle management in the American army and in a lot of Western armies is that we have all of this knowledge in our heads that we pass down to other people. And we also act as this second command structure that gets things done behind the scenes while the officers are worried about the mission. You go do the mission, I'm going to go make sure you have everything you need to do the mission. So Russia doesn't really have that. And that, if you have competent leadership and good training, then you might not necessarily need that. Look at Israel. Israel has a similar structure. They do have senior NCOs. It's not quite the same. I was actually just talking to an Israeli who was a sergeant first class like I was.
Okay.
They do have that, but for the most part, they have a reserve system, and their reservists don't really progress into those mid-level Burger King manager, drive-through manager ranks. So but no one would say Israel's fighting force is ineffective.
Right.
Yeah. Mainly because they're empowered to make their own decisions. So what you don't have in the Russian military is those mid-level NCOs who can pass down information and empower people to make decisions. That can be fixed by training. That can be fixed by officer leadership. But right now, Russia doesn't seem to have that training thing down, nor the leadership part.
It might be, might be more of a societal issue too. Just as we've seen in history, what Russia tends to do is just, send out the first wave of people, right? And it's like, we're going to establish a second and a third wave behind those people. And if the first wave starts retreating, the second wave shoots the first wave, and then the third wave shoots the second. So there's kind of like this no retreat, and maybe it's not true for all of their battles, but certainly I've seen this kind of society issue where it's like, well, we're not going to give up. There's strength and power. We're going to power through this no matter what. And so maybe that's just another thing that they have to overcome, right?
Well, the problem. So I actually think that Enemy at the Gates was not correct in their portrayal of the Russian military.
Yeah.
But I understand they didn't actually use human wave attacks like that, and the units that prevented retreat, really, they went and rounded up deserters. They didn't necessarily machine gun people. So I think Enemy at the Gates took some liberties with that because it was a little more dramatic. The problem with using any kind of human wave or cannon fodder type attacks is that every time you do that, the enemy gets smarter. So, like I said back in the beginning of this podcast, the soldiers, those 300,000 soldiers that are being sent to the front,
right?
A bunch of them are going to get killed.
Yeah.
The people who live are going to live either, sometimes it's because of luck, but sometimes it's because they go, oh, don't do that thing. That guy did that thing and he got killed, so I'm not going to do that thing. And that guy survives, and he can tell other people, don't do this thing, because my buddy got killed, so don't do this thing. And then he becomes a junior NCO, right?
Right.
So if you use a bunch of human wave attacks against your adversary is going to sit back and just be plinking you off and going, all right, I see what happens when they do that. And then they get experience. And then they get blooded. The first time that I actually had an army story about this was the first time I was ever shot at, which actually wasn't really being shot at, but the first time it was absolutely terrifying. And the second time I was fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because once you get over that, oh my God, kind of thing, it's like, all right, this is a job. I have to do this job. Let me go do this thing. So if you're throwing people away on a human wave attack in the hopes that you'll wear the enemy down, what you're really doing is giving the enemy experience. Because experience is a great freaking teacher. And now these guys know, okay, I know what to do when the enemy attacks. You don't want to give your enemy that advantage. You don't want to give your enemy that experience, especially at the cost of your own soldiers. So.
Yeah. So Ryan, I know we have a little bit of a time concern for, I guess, do you have a few more minutes to chat?
I can keep going for a little while, yeah.
Fascinating conversation here.
Absolutely.
So I want to throw a hypothetical situation at you and hypothetical in the sense of that, one side, potentially one side would win this war, right? Let's say Ukraine wins this war. However they do it, I'm not really saying anything there. What do you think would happen to the Ukrainian military? What would it look like in Ukraine if they win this war? Lessons learned, that kind of thing. What should or what would Ukraine military leadership start doing? Knowing that they would have won the war.
So I don't think there's any win. There's no win.
Okay.
Nobody's going to win.
Yeah.
Russia's not going to win. Ukraine isn't going to win. Europe sure as heck isn't going to win.
Yeah.
People in the Africa and the Middle East are going to starve, right? Or at least grain prices.
That's a really good clarification.
So there's no win. Yeah. I want to get that out of everybody's head. I see that in YouTube comments, especially from Russian bots who say Russia will win. Like, you already lost. So is Ukraine. So is the entire freaking world. So there's no win. I think lessons learned that we can take out of this are we need a lot more ammunition than you think.
Yeah.
A lot more ammunition. We also need to have distributed factories. Another thing. We should be able to manufacture, countries should be able to manufacture their own stuff. So I'm sure Ukraine looked at their stockpile of ammunition and went, oh, we're good, even though we can't make any more of this. We're never going to use this stuff. You're good until it's a problem, right? I think the third thing is people are going to, not just Ukraine, but the rest of the world is going to look at their Russian equipment and they're going to get rid of it as fast as possible. Because if you're a political leader in a country, let's say you're in an African nation, and you're a semi-democratic country, right? Like, it's a democratic country, but there's some shenanigans every once in a while. So you have an opposition group. Yeah. This opposition group says, hey, your president has, they have T-72s from the Russian military. Look at these T-72s all blown out over the field in Ukraine. Why is he ordering more T-72s? Our army deserves the best. So if you're the president of some African or South American country and you're looking at your army going, people blew those up. Maybe I don't want these in my military. And I want to stay in power. I don't want some opposition leader holding this over my head. So that's probably a lesson learned. That Russian equipment, Russia, one of the things that Russia did after the first Gulf War and after Iraq was that they were able to say, oh, well, that's just the Iraqis. They just didn't know how to use our equipment. Which, if you ever fought in Iraq, you'll know that some Iraqis fight like freaking wolves. Bravery is not an issue, at least with some insurgents. Their equipment's bad.
Yeah, right.
It's bad equipment. So you're going to see I think you're probably going to see an issue of Russia trying to sell their stuff on the open market, on the world market. As an arms dealer, people are going to be going, maybe we're going to go with France. Maybe we're going to go with the U.S.
Right.
Design.
What are the lessons?
That's the lessons learned. I think a fourth lesson that Ukraine can learn, and also probably the rest of Europe, is that maybe we've taken our gun policy in the wrong direction.
Interesting.
Like you talking about like homeowner gun policy? So
yes and no. I'm not saying the world needs Americans' gun policy. I know that gun ownership was legal in Ukraine with restrictions. You have to get a permit and all that. But I know in Europe, there's not a lot of gun owners, and many of the people who are gun owners are hunters. Not a lot of hunters outside of the city. I'm not suggesting that Europe needs American-style gun ownership or gun laws. Right. But what might not be a bad idea is for countries in Europe to create shooting clubs. Where one of the big issues in Ukraine was that they're handing out rifles to people who are like, I was a college professor. I guess I can find a manual on YouTube or something.
Right.
But if Europe ever has to raise a militia or an army very quickly, they're going to have a very hard time doing that because so many people are totally unfamiliar with firearms. So it might not be a bad idea for Ukraine to maintain a system of militia or for Europe to create shooting clubs where people can go to the shooting club, they can pay a nominal fee and shoot military weapons under the supervision of police or military, maybe learn some tactics. You're not in the military, you're just in a shooting club.
Yeah.
Put up a cafe after, like go to the cafe afterwards.
Concession
like,
stand.
It might not be a bad idea for Taiwan to do that as well.
Yeah.
Just have a shooting club. You don't own the gun, you don't keep it in your home. It's at the shooting club. And then you have a group of people who at least know how they need to know. At least you have a group of people who know which end of a rifle the bullet comes out of if you ever have to form a militia very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about on the flip side, on the Russian side, what are some of the lessons learned that, that the Russian side would potentially or should learn and adapt?
So what they should learn how to use their tanks. And I know I said their vehicles are bad. Their vehicles aren't bad. They were designed with a very specific purpose in mind. They were designed for ease of production, and they were designed for cost. And one of the reasons that the T-72 has an autoloader is that Russia said, hey, look, we're going to fight in a nuclear environment. Who's going to get the shine? And when you open the breech on a gun, all of the radioactive shine is coming into that gun breech right into the loader's right arm. So if you just eliminate the loader, hey, you have one less person who's getting exposed to radiation, and you can make the tank smaller, and you can make the tank cheaper. So everything's a win.
Is that really the concept of the autoloader in that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not stupid. The Russians aren't stupid. They did it for a reason. It reduces, they're going to fight. Their whole doctrine was to fight in a nuclear environment. That's why their whole army's mechanized. That's why they don't have light infantry.
Oh.
You're in your BMP, you're in your BRDM, you're reasonably safe from radiation in that vehicle. You're fighting inside the vehicle. And, in the case of the autoloader for the T-72, the loader isn't getting any shine.
Man, that makes so much more sense. Because that
Doesn't
just means
it?
all the
stupid. It's
all the vehicle stuff is just it's to get you to point A to point B safely in a contained
in a nuclear environment. So the autoloader carousel might blow up, but why did they make they made the tank smaller. It's about 2/3 the size of an Abrams. Smaller tanks are harder to hit. And back when they designed the thing, they had wire guided missiles, but their main concern was guns. Tanks smaller to hit, doesn't need as much armor, and some tanks are going to get hit, and then they're heroes of the motherland, so people are going to die, right?
Yeah.
So one thing I think, let me back up for a second. One thing I think Russia needs to learn is how to use their vehicles and equipment. Because you can use a T-72 to deadly effect if you know how to use the thing. So that's number one. So number two thing is Russia needs to have dedicated SEAD, suppression of enemy air defenses. That's one thing they don't have. The first thing America does when we decide to invade some poor country is we take out their air defenses. That's number one. That's like rule number one. If you took a look at the playbook, you're like, all right, yep, just take out air defense. Okay. So we have a special missile. It's called the HARM, high-speed anti-radiation missile. And these HARMs, they can go on many different types of fighters in the American inventory, but there is a specialty F-16 that is just used, or it can be used for other things, but there's special squadrons of F-16s that are used for wild weasel or essentially SEAD, suppression of enemy air defenses. So these guys go in first. They find all the enemy radars. They shoot HARM missiles at them. They shut them down. Now we own the sky, essentially, right? Russia needs to do that. There's really only 2 countries in the world that have dedicated seed aircraft. It's America and China. Russia, their Su-34 can do seed. I want to say the MiG-31 can as well. I might be wrong about that. But they really, all the work is being done by the missile, not the computer systems inside the jet. So they need dedicated seed. That's another thing. The other thing is that I think Russia needs to look at light infantry as an option. You know, they've been mech for so long. Everything is mechanized. That's great. But light infantry gives you a lot of flexibility. It's tougher to move them, but it's less logistically. There's fewer logistical requirements on light infantry. You don't have to worry about pole, petroleum, oil, lubricants. You don't have to worry about fuel. You know, they just walk until they just walk and shoot everybody who isn't dressed like them. Right? That's light infantry.
Yeah.
That might be another thing they have to think about doing. Maybe introducing mid-level NCOs, those Burger King managers, into their ranks.
Yeah,
it might not be a bad idea to have that separate NCO path. But that's a tough cultural change for them to do. I guess another thing would be deconfliction. That's a big thing too. Russia just can't seem to do deconfliction. But in all fairness, the NATO has a hard time with it as well. Deconfliction?
Yeah, expand that a little
bit. I mean that if you have surface-to-air missiles, you have planes, you have artillery firing, and normally, at least at NATO, you have a Joint Operations Center, JOC, and everything is controlled in that JOC. And you know, if you're going to have surface-to-air missiles covering this area right here, you push that information out to pilots saying, don't go over here. Even though you have IFF or Identified Friend or Foe systems on your airplane, don't go over here. Russia, they just can't do deconfliction. They just can't do it. And so they're just not flying as many sorties as they could because they're afraid of shooting down their own planes. So practice deconfliction. That should be another thing. They need to practice deconfliction.
Which I think we've kind of seen a few videos of them shooting their own, their own missiles down and their own planes down, and
it's tough. You know, if you're in, I mean, I did a video about how the Patriot works.
Yeah,
and people said, "Oh my God, that was better than the Hurt Locker," which I mean, it's not saying much.
Oh, that's true. Okay,
and Twilight was better than the Hurt Locker. But, you know, you're in that GCS, you're in that trailer, you're in that van, and you're seeing a target on that radar screen. You have X amount of seconds to make the decision.
Yeah.
And either way, if you're right, people die. If you're wrong, people die.
Yeah.
Like, what a freaking incredible decision for a kid to have to make. Right or wrong, people die.
He's reconnecting now.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
I didn't touch my mouse.
Just shut down.
And the computer just went
okay.
black.
That's okay.
That's another thing they need to work on. Communications. They're using, in some cases, unencrypted radios.
Right.
And EW, electronic warfare. That's another issue as well. When the war first started, they were using electronic warfare, and then they all turned it off because they were stepping on each other. You know? They were jamming their own guys. And that's what allowed, we haven't really seen any Bayraktar drone footage lately. It's because Russia's jamming them. They figured that out. But during those first couple of days, you had these crazy scenes where you have this freaking cheap Bayraktar drone dropping a freaking micro munition on a Buk missile system, and that thing's gone. That shouldn't have happened. So they need to learn EW as well. I guess that's the sixth thing.
So I'm curious that with all these lessons I have to learn, this isn't just even going to play into the fact, and I know this is not as much of a military question, but how long is, I mean, just based on what's happened, the more we see of unfortunately, the mass burial sites and all sorts of. How long do you think Russia is just going to become this pariah? And to your point about the weapon system's not working anymore. I mean, I think India was set to buy a bunch of stuff, and they're like, "Oh, we gotta get out of this contract because they're not holding up right." So, yeah, I mean, that's if you understand my question there. I mean, it just seems like there's so much animosity now against Russia. What does that mean for them? I guess.
When it comes to real politics, Russia will be a pariah until we need the oil and gas.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's really easy. It's really easy to have morals and values when it's the summertime. I think that the best thing Ukraine can hope for is a warm winter. Because it'd be very easy for European nations, no matter how much they like to think themselves to be above all that, to say, you know what? I want to get elected again. And there's people who are cold and they're upset that we're turning the lights off, in government buildings at 5:00 every day and turning the heat down to 63.
Right.
Or whatever it is in Celsius. 11. I don't freaking know. So that's a tough one. I think that Russia's arms industry is going to take a huge hit. Just because that's a long-term thing. And if you're a nation, when you buy weapons, you're not really buying a weapon. You're buying the weapon, you're buying the service contract, you're buying the ammunition, you're buying the technicians who fly over to your country and work with you for 10 years. You're buying the contractors. And that's a big commitment. And again, like I said, you have people who are going to be going, oh, the opposition is going to be angry at me so that might be a little harder to get out of. But if you need oil and gas and someone's selling, you got to get elected again, right? And it's a lot, if you have someone saying, hey, I promise you we won't have to have our thermostats at 11 anymore if you elect me because I'll do something magical. That magical thing might be Russia, right? I mean, what is Russia? Yeah. Russia is a mafia-owned gas station.
With nukes.
Right?
With nukes.
That's essentially what Russia is. With nuclear
Allegedly.
Weapons, maybe. It's funny. I posted that video. I did a video about one of the ways you can boost the yield of a nuclear weapon is with this isotope called tritium. And if Russia hasn't been replacing the tritium in these warheads, that could be a big problem. Right? And of course, you have people say, well, you don't really need the tritium, and you don't I know physics. All of a sudden you know physics too. I am an engineer. I mean, it's certainly possible that you could have weapons that don't use tritium. They're not boosted fission weapons, but it would be kind of interesting because if you're a huge nation like Russia and you're like, well, you know what? We're probably never going to use these nuclear weapons. Why are we maintaining all these things? Let's just keep 100 just for contingencies or for planetary defense. We don't really need 1,500 nuclear weapons, right? Well, 100 would be bad, right? Even one would be bad, but it may not be the threat that they like to make themselves out to be.
So,
yeah, no, I think this is a good question to.
Yeah, maybe this is a good question to end on here. And this has been just fascinating for us to learn a lot about, kind of what you're talking about, and maybe dispelling a lot of the things that we see and try to equate to what's happening. Right. So, really appreciate that. We've heard people from all kinds of sides on this war say it's gonna be over in a few weeks. It's gonna be over end of winter next year. Realistically, a war like this with all these political, you've got the human side of things, you've got because here's another angle, the US can't continue to send billions and billions of dollars without people saying, "Hey, why are we sending so much money to Ukraine?" Which is already happening, right? And so, what are your thoughts on typically what a war like this would last for, or for how long it would last for, and where could we see an end?
And especially as winter is coming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the end doesn't have to be one, or it maybe it's draw, it's a stalemate, whatever it is.
So the way I envision this ending, not winning, but ending, is I envision a negotiated settlement with Ukraine in a position of power. I know there's people who say we want to take back all these areas, or we want to take back Crimea. Like, Crimea would be an amphibious invasion that would rival Incheon or Normandy. Like, I don't see Ukraine being able to do that. What I envision is a peace settlement with Ukraine negotiating from a position of strength in the areas of Donbass, Donetsk, Luhansk, and even Crimea. Maybe not Crimea. Let's just worry about Donetsk and Luhansk, because Crimea is its own thing. I could see Donetsk and Luhansk becoming sort of like a Kurdistan kind of independent state-ish kind of thing, like Iraq has, with a peacekeeping force similar to the multinational force and observers that are in Sinai, Egypt, to enforce the Egypt-Israeli peace treaty. So I could easily see a peacekeeping force that a NATO-led, or not even NATO, probably a world coalition, like people from Fiji and not Taiwan,
Thailand.
The other, some of them. I was trying to think about Malaysia, because they have a good military. Malaysia, I could see Malaysia. They actually were pretty good military. Malaysia and other countries, and they send a rotational unit to the Donbass, and they keep the peace there. And Donbass is this quasi-independent state like the Kurds are in Iraq. I could see that. How long it'll last? I think that if it's a cold winter in Europe, I think you're going to start seeing people turn. I think you're going to start seeing Europe turn on Ukraine, because, like, we need gas, we need Russian oil. If it's a warm winter, I think this will go on for a while, probably another year at least, and into a stalemate. And then you mentioned how, America keeps sending billions of dollars. Like, there's always money for a war. Come on. Like, what are you crazy? Like, you're never going to see a situation where the Air Force has a bake sale to buy a bomber. All right? There's always money for a war. We'll print it. We got plenty of money, right? So I wouldn't worry too much about the U.S. giving up resolve, because, when you think about it, like, this is a proxy war. This is totally a proxy war of the U.S. fighting Russia. And now you got Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, all these defense contractors who not only do they have, like, the best commercial ever for their stuff, but now they can keep the production lines going. And now just the threat of Russia that's already proof that we need more javelins. And what else we need are chips. People have said Russia's running out of cruise missiles. Yeah, they are not as fast as people in the West would like, or people in Ukraine would like, but Russia, I'm sure, can fab some chips. But they can't fab everything. And America can fab some chips. We can't fab everything. So I think another thing that people should probably learn from this is chip manufacturing is defense. Chip manufacturing today is the steel of the 1940s, the steel plants of the 1940s. So without chips, you don't.
Is that a reason why? I mean, just even recently here, then the Biden administration, it seems like in the past 72 hours, has just basically said everybody in China that works on chip manufacturing engineering, you have an option. You can work there, or you can lose your citizenship, which is wild for a whole bunch of reasons. But what you're saying is like, this is it. This is the thing that every country is going to need for a whole bunch of reasons, but especially when it comes to defense and protection.
I think absolutely. I actually wasn't aware that we had given an ultimatum.
And maybe you can correct me on that, but it really seems. We listened to.
Bloomberg just says there's a ban on U.S. talent at China chip firms.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd buy that. I know that one of the major issues we have with China is that they send a lot of people over here to not China. You know what? Let me back that up. Chinese people are fantastic. The Chinese Communist Party, though, those guys need a check. Right? The Chinese Communist Party sends people over here to go to school, and those people can theoretically become spies. And they work for American companies. Theoretically become spies. Again, that goes back to affinity, right? You know, if you're I don't even say Chinese American, but if you're an immigrant from China and the Chinese Communist Party paid your way over to America, paid for your college, you know, where are your loyalties going to be, right? So that can be a thing. I can see why you might not want to have American citizens over in China working on chips. Yeah, you can. I can see why that would be an issue, but I would have to look that up. I wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, this is just basically just a day ago, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's very, very recent. But anyways, at minimum, this is the start of exactly what you're talking about, of like the importance of a shortage of everything, it seems like. But chips is one of those scenarios here. So
I certainly think that, you know, for the longest time, if you were an executive at an American firm and you were not outsourcing to China, then you were crazy. You would get fired by your stockholders, because there's that theory of capitalism. Every country should make what they're good at, right? Well, we tried that. What is America good at? Well, we're good at making guns.
Yeah.
I'm sure we export other stuff, but we contracted everything but guns out to China, essentially. And now, I think one thing COVID showed was that, like, hey, maybe we ought to bring some manufacturing back here. You know, it doesn't make any sense that why can't, you know, I think I tried to look for masks. Like, why? We don't have the capability of making a mask? It's a freaking mask. How do we not have the ability to make a mask? You know, but apparently there was one 3M owned one place in Minnesota where they made American-made masks, and everything else is made in Mexico or China. Nothing wrong with doing that until there is.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, Ryan, this has been just a fantastic conversation. I love these long form discussions because we can kind of get into the nuance and talk about all the stuff. So really appreciate you joining us, and we hope, listeners, that you learn a few things today. Obviously, this war is I think you said it right. There is no winner here. Everyone loses, right? But the sooner that we can come to an end, I think, my hope would be the sooner things start rebuilding for the world and for Ukraine and even for Russia. You know, they need to rebuild too. So
I think Russia is too important as a country to space exploration and to creating fertilizer, chemicals, to have them be a pariah. We need Russia as a partner in the world. But hopefully we also have to stand up to bullies.
Yep. Hopefully with better leadership and more, democratic ideals. And so, yeah. But again, thank you so much. We'll say our goodbyes after the end here.
Where would you like to point people to come check out your stuff?
You can go to ryanmcbeth.com or just go to YouTube and search for Ryan McBeth. I'm not the
the guy from the Shakespeare, right? Yeah.
Well done. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for having this good discussion. Oh, I got one more. Okay.
Yep. All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right.